Good afternoon. I'm Garrett Graff. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Initiatives for the Aspen Institute in the United States. And I am excited to be joining you at the Bucharest Forum today for a panel on social media and democracy, how to build social resilience in a complex context. We have a great group of panelists from across Europe today to discuss how new technologies are impacting democracy in challenging and complex new ways. While the benefits of technology are undeniable, digitalization has also provided both state and non-state actors interested in undermining democracy with significant opportunities for disruption. Social media has become a battleground for the hearts and minds of citizens, for voters, for readers, for viewers, all manner of new challenges and new audiences. We're going to spend the next hour together talking about how democracy should meet this challenge, how we can push back as governments, as civil society, as academics, as researchers, as informed citizens. And what we are seeing across the military realm, as well as countries like China and Russia begin to embark on a new form of hybrid warfare against institutions such as NATO, the EU, and member states in Europe. So how can international organizations and social media platforms, how can citizens and governments work together to collaborate and counter these tactics? This is a societal debate, it's a technological debate, it's a political debate, and I am very excited to hear from this morning, my time on the East Coast of the United States, this afternoon for you in Bucharest and Europe. For this conversation. So we have four great panelists today with a variety of different perspectives. We have Ambassador Baiba Braže, the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO. We have the Director General of Communication for the European Commission, Pia Ahrenkilde Hansen. And we have the Dean of the Faculty of Communication and Public Relations for the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in Bucharest, Professor Alina Bârgăoanu. We will be joined in a few minutes as well by Jacob Tarasky, the Head of Public Policy for Facebook in Poland, the Baltics, Romania, and Bulgaria. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists today to begin by providing a few opening remarks about these challenges, about how they view from their own work and their own institutions what the democracy should be doing to meet this challenge. And we will begin with Ambassador Braže.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting and having me. I'm most honored to be together with such distinguished speakers. Please take a moment to check out our Deputy Secretary General's keynote speech last week. It was very inspiring, if you haven't seen it yet. And why is NATO on this panel? Let me just in my few minutes to make three simple points. The first of those is democracy and NATO's role. NATO was established to protect democracies. It's an alliance of democracies. It's about security and specifically about political consensus building and strengthening our unity. It's also about military structures that are necessary for successful deterrence. Thanks to NATO, democracies have flourished for over 70 years. And my point is that NATO is here and is always there because it always looks out how best to provide democracies with a secure environment. Second, on social media and various insecurities and opinions that it has created. So clearly, the developments in cyber and the digitalization has created new insecurities, and those are also a concern to NATO. Social media plays a distinct role in that. So on the minus side, as we all know, it creates bubbles where our biases are reinforced and where various dissenting views or facts are filtered. They also make it easy for disinformation to be spread and to be profitable, thus fragmenting our societies. On top of that, sites use fake news to maximize profits, to attract various difficult people and criminals, and actually to make profit through that and undermine independent, free, quality media. So it also has an impact in the real world, undermining our public policies and targeting our democratic institutions and vital elements of society. So again, free media, that is an essential element in our society, has particularly been affected. It also makes political dialogue more difficult. However, on the positive side, social media, of course, provides a great platform globally for discussions, for opinion exchange, for free speech, and for people to distribute and receive various opinions and to learn from each other. So this is particularly good news because, of course, it has expanded the space for a clear democratic debate. However, in our view, there are also challenges because it has, in a way, devalued what information and quality information and what facts are. So it is easy to disseminate information, and it is very difficult to distinguish between facts and opinions. My third point is around resilience. This is NATO's recipe for answering these challenges. So development of social media had proved to be rather corrosive to our democracies, in our view. And so reaching our publics, reaching civil society, reaching every individual, not only the governments, becomes crucial. So public institutions like national governments, like NATO, like the international institutions like the EU and others, have an important role, both in terms of understanding what is happening, legislating, and if necessary, regulating to address these imbalances. So NATO, for its part, proposes to address the insecurities by building up resilience in our societies and by contributing our viewpoint to the debates with the UN, with the EU, and other bodies, and cooperating with them very closely. So resilience is a time-tested and essential concept for NATO. It's actually part of the Washington Treaty, Article 3. Just last week, the Secretary General recalled that resilience is in NATO's DNA and called for a strengthened and broadened commitment to resilience. It's about our collective capacity to remain operational, to remain safe, free, and ultimately democratic. So we have so-called resilient baselines or sort of minimal criteria for various areas of life, and that relates especially to governments, from energy to transport to communications to critical infrastructures and more. And they've been updated as a consequence of COVID effects on the alliance and our allies. And they are also to be upheld across the governments, but we are also working on an additional line of work, which is wider. Not only it's a whole government approach, but actually a whole society approach. And here it would relate also to very clearly including the private sector and civil society. So in the widest aspect, with meaning also the free media and tech companies and everybody, bringing it to co-responsibility, co-work and actually delivering the results that are so essential for our societies. At the end, no private business will profit if our societies and our countries are less secure. So that is my contribution to today's discussion, and I'm very happy to say also that Romania is in forefront of hosting us today in all this. So let's have a good panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And I'm sure we'll come back and talk more about how the COVID pandemic has affected and shaped and remade the information environment across Europe and across the world over the last couple of months. I want to turn next to Director General for your opening comments and your opening thoughts on our topic today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Graff, and many thanks for this distinguished panel. I was delighted to hear the ambassador speak about resilience as part of NATO's DNA, and we're delighted to working together with her and her colleagues on building resilience as far as the European Union are concerned, and very, very grateful for the cooperation we're having and intensifying. Let me start maybe from a slightly different perspective, from the social media perspective, because it has such a prominent role in when we speak about disinformation. And I would like to just say as the first message that it's obvious that social media, and with it indeed also disinformation, have to a degree transformed also our politics. I'm saying this, of course, as the leader of the communications department of Europe's executive, the European Commission, the European Union's executive, and also the guardian of our treaties, and maybe I should even say our values in the European Union. But even if we acknowledge this transformation by social media of our politics, indeed, in terms of communication, because that's the angle that I'm taking to this as a communicator, many of our objectives remain the same when it comes to getting messages across, when it comes to competing for media attention or mobilizing people to act. But the methods that we're working with, and I think that's very important when we consider disinformation, are of course changing, and we have seen, of course, in recent years that we are adopting new channels for political information, and with them also we are seeing new voices joining indeed the public space. We are seeing new rhythms and conventions when it comes to media and information work, beyond hitting deadlines and of course since long having entered a 24-hour cycle of constant content and information creation and flows. So these changes are really quite big societal changes too, with big impacts, of course, on precisely our societies. And so this is the environment in which disinformation, of course, disinformation is not a new phenomenon, as we have heard, but this is the environment in which disinformation develops. And to declare that as this whole environment, the social media environment, notably as entirely negative, as we also heard, is definitely not what I'm going to do. That would be way too simplistic, but also to declare it entirely positive would also be to be willfully blind or at least naive. So I think we need to be very lucid and very determined when we approach these questions. That I want to see more about opportunities if we know how to use them, and if we know how to indeed deal with the threats that disinformation can represent to our democracy, and indeed to our way of doing political communication. So maximizing opportunities and mitigating, if not completely eliminating those threats is definitely, from a communications point of view, something that we need to work hard to do. And disinformation, misinformation, and those two things are not entirely or at all, by the way, the same. We may get to discuss that more in detail later, but let me just say that they both represent threats to public safety. They both represent a risk of reducing the public trust in government and in media, and they both risk damaging our economies and undermining potentially our global influence if we don't tackle them strategically, because that's my second message. Maybe we must be strategic. We can't run after every little lie that we detect on the internet, even if we're getting better and better at doing it. So in the EU, we fight in numerous ways. I'll just very briefly list it because we don't have too much time. Apart from taking our departing shot in 2015, when the European Council really framed the issue for the European Union, we in the European Commission have been developing a comprehensive action plan since 2018 that we have been deploying. We have been working with platforms, one of which represented on this panel, according to a code of practice that we developed in 2018. Our External Action Service has strategically also very much worked on this by establishing and really working with a very strong outreach on disinformation in the task force. And here in the department that I'm leading, we've been addressing myth-busting and fact-checking, focusing on how we can work with positive evidence-based messaging and strong counter-narratives. And you will have seen it, and I will end with that because then we can move to the discussion. We've been working very much recently in the coronavirus response with, let's say, anchoring a space for fighting disinformation on a central website where we have been addressing conspiracies around vaccination, for example, something that our College of Commissioners also tackled as recently as today, where they prepared a vaccination preparedness strategy, which they will put forward tomorrow. That also has a disinformation chapter, or at least an action. And we have indeed been raising in many ways, like we've been doing according to our action plan, and supporting actions on literacy, media literacy. And we will move forward over the next year with a Facts Matter campaign, again to raise awareness as we go forward. All of that, let's say, following also the specifically focused corona response disinformation communication that we issued in June. So there's a lot of things that are going on, but I would say maybe, and that's my last message, the best remedy is against disinformation is and remains a healthy media environment and mindful citizens. So a lot of principles should be promoted to indeed encourage citizens to take care before they share. You could summarize it that way. And we will, on our side, in addition to supporting fact checkers, drawing on research that some of our other services are also carrying out, be continuing to lead the way in Europe in tackling disinformation in different ways. Of course, also in addition to what all our member states coordinating their actions will be doing, joining up more and more, as indeed has been the case during the corona crisis, to help also our citizens understand how disinformation really works. And I think I will stop there, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much. I want to turn now to Professor Bârgăoanu. You have written tremendously about this. You have studied this. You have a book that's even called #FakeNews. So tell us a little bit about how you look at this and sort of how you see this problem playing out across Europe right now.
Thank you very much for this exciting panel. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the previous contributions. Very briefly, let me relate to what the two distinguished speakers said. And I would emphasize myself that any discussion about the role of digital platforms should begin with an acknowledgement of their amazing success. I think that they shouldn't be demonized, but again, any serious discussion about their role in the new ecosystem should start with acknowledging the amazing quantity of innovation that they injected in our personal lives, in our professional lives, in our politics. At the same time, and equally forceful, I would say that at least now we are aware that they are double-edged swords. So I think that at least during the coronavirus crisis, pretty much everyone is aware that on the same highways where circulate a lot of good ideas and a lot of connections, also circulate back a lot of propaganda, a lot of hate speech, cognitive war, and stuff like this. So this in order to relate very briefly to the previous two distinguished speakers. About my introductory statements, I would make the point that there are still some weaknesses about the public conversation around fake news and disinformation. And I can testify that these weaknesses are also part of the discussion that take place inside the European Union bodies, for example. And I was a member of the high-level expert group on fake news and disinformation. Now I am a part of the consultative board of the European Digital Media Observatory, so I think that these are first-hand observations too. And very briefly, these weaknesses of public conversation around disinformation are the following. The first weakness is that we still consider that we talk about news, about mass media. When talking about disinformation, I think that we do not deal with news, with the journalistic genre of news, but we talk about a wholly distinctive phenomenon of our world, about a phenomenon which is platform-driven, which is big data-driven, which is algorithm-driven, and which is increasingly driven by machine learning and artificial intelligence. So somehow we still talk about news, about journalists, about traditional media, whereas I think that the focus of today's disinformation disorder is created by the new ecosystem, which again is technology-driven, is platform-driven, is big data-driven, and increasingly it is driven by machine learning and artificial intelligence. The second weakness of public conversation about disinformation and fake news is that we focus a lot on content. We somehow focus about this distinction that comes from different ages, from the Gutenberg galaxy, for example, on this distinction between what is true and what is false. And I think while this distinction is still very important, I think that in the digital environment, what matters most is not the content as such, no matter how much we would like it to be so, but what matters is the speed with which information travels, the networks through which this information travels, and the level of information, of interaction and engagement that it creates. So again, I think that in academia, in the political circles, in the consultative bodies, we focus a lot on content at the expense of this discussion about how fast the information travels and through which networks. And the third weakness of the current conversation about disinformation is that any attempt to talk about regulation of big platforms, of big technology companies, is immediately labeled as censorship, as an infringement on free speech, an infringement of constitutional rights. And I think that we should, again, the discussion about free speech, about what is legal and what is harmful is a very interesting discussion. But again, when talking about the role of digital platforms in creating the new ecosystem, has less to do with content as such, but with the technology behind, with the transparency about how algorithms function, how big data are used, how big data are self-enforcing and stuff like this. To stop my introductory remark, I would say that we are dealing with a technological problem, mainly, but I think that the solution to this problem is not only technological, but it is technological, is social, and mostly political at the same time. So this is where the discussion about resilience comes in, and I very much agree to the idea that we are dealing with a whole of society approach, in which the technology companies, the political leadership, the NGO, and the private sector, the representatives of the digital platforms, should sit together in order to have a conversation.
Thanks so much, Professor. I want to turn now to our final opening remarks. Jacob Tarosky from Facebook has joined us now and would love you to add your opening thoughts on our topic of social media, democracy, and resilience.
Right. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Perfect. So first of all, please accept my apologies for being a bit late for this panel. Now to answer your question, obviously for us, yeah, I mean, protecting the integrity of the elections while preserving freedom of expression is a top priority. And I mean, using lessons learned from the past and input also from experts and policymakers from across the political spectrum, we've made really substantial investments in teams and kind of technologies to better secure the elections. We now have more than 35,000 people around the world working on safety and security. And our strategy to protect elections doesn't only apply, obviously, in critical times, but it's really a year-long effort that is kind of focusing on three different areas, I'd say. The first one being the prevention of interference. The second being all that is content related, so removing harmful content on the one hand, but also reducing misinformation. And the third aspect is increasing the transparency. So with regards to preventing interference, a key part of Facebook's strategy is to prevent interference by working with government authorities, law enforcement, security experts, civil societies, and so on and so forth. And so we have advanced our security operations to take down manipulation campaigns and identify kind of emerging threats. And our teams of investigators actively look for takedown of coordinated networks that indeed threat our platform. Now, we do that based on the kind of on what our investigators find on the platform. But to a very large extent, we also do so thanks to the partnership we have with local authorities, because at some point there are some things that we do not see at the platform. And this is this partnership that we may have with, again, law enforcement, local authorities and stuff like that, that can help us to identify all sorts of clusters of CIB activities and then take them down. So that's for the interference in a huge nutshell. Now, with regards to content, there are several aspects here. The first one is that obviously we do remove content that is in breach of our community standards. We also remove content that is driven by fake accounts. And this is extremely helpful in fighting with misinformation, because we've seen that a lot of content that is misinformation is often shared by fake accounts. And here I think that, I mean, I'm in this company for 6 years and I really see the difference from a technological perspective. This real identity policy is something that has always existed with Facebook. That being said, in the past, it was reactive only, which means that if a user thought that some other user was not a real user, it had to be reported and we would then investigate. Today, we proactively remove millions of fake accounts a day before they even posted anything. And this is indeed thanks to AI and to machine learning and to these kind of new tools. So there is a lot of content that is removed. But there is also a lot of content that is not removed, but for which we reduce the reach. And this is mainly what we call fake news or false news. And here our approach is to say that we, apart from the content that is fake and that is a harm to the health of our users, we do not remove false news. Why? Because our approach is to say, first of all, that it's not up to Facebook to say what is true and what is not true. And this is why we enter into cooperation in every single country. Fact checkers that have checked the content that we have assessed that may be of issue. What I mean by that is that based on a lot of different signals, the fact checkers get the posts that have been assessed as possibly false, and then it's up to them, A, to decide if they're going to assess, and B, to make the assessment as such. Once the assessment is done, then the content is showed as fake on Facebook, and also, and maybe most importantly, there is underneath an article done by the fact checker explaining why there is a problem with the veracity of the content. Again, happy to further develop afterwards. The third aspect that is, I believe, also extremely important is all that is related to transparency. When we talk about political ads, obviously at some point there's been the question on the table, maybe there should be no political ads at all on Facebook and in the internet. Well, the way we started thinking about it is that, well, there should be, but users should know clearly who's posting the ad, where the ad comes from, how it's targeted, and what's the budget. And I think we are the industry with the biggest transparency with regards to how political ads are posted and targeted and stuff like that. You have nothing like that in the radio, in the press, in TV and stuff like that. So today, for anyone to post a political or issue ad on Facebook, first it has to be validated. What I mean by that is that we check if the user that posts the ad is indeed in the country where the ad is targeted to avoid foreign interference. And then once we've checked that, every political and social ad goes into some sort of a library where it's there during 7 years, and every user can check every single ad that has been posted by the page, check who paid for the ad, check what was the target, what was the budget, and so on and so forth. And whereas obviously, no tool is perfect, and what we're talking about is anyway an arms race, and there's always going to be bad guys trying to figure out new ways to kind of mislead the system. But this tool is, I believe, really an important one in our kind of will to ensure integrity of the election and to ensure proper democratic system. That all being said, obviously the question with regards to regulation is a key one. As it's already been mentioned, we are working on a code of practice with the European institutions for years now. And we also warmly welcomed the EDAP initiative on which we had public consultations since a few weeks ago. And in these consultations, we made it very clear that, for instance, political ads is maybe a topic that should be further regulated. We today, as a private company, are the ones who decide what is a kind of political topic, what is a social topic. Maybe it should not be the case that we are the ones to decide. Maybe it should be indeed some democratically elected institution for them to decide. So yeah, I fully agree that on some fields, there is absolutely a need of better, stronger regulation for some decisions to be taken by democratically elected institutions.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. I want to spend a little bit of time now trying to dive into, there was a tremendous amount of material that you all just covered and laid out, and we could spend the next several days talking it all the way through. So I want to come back to each of you in turn and sort of ask you to expand upon a little bit of what you mentioned earlier and pick up a couple of these threads. Ambassador, you mentioned the COVID pandemic and the challenge that we have seen as what began as a public health crisis has spiraled into and enveloped both a security crisis and an information crisis as well. And I wonder if you could sort of talk about what you have seen over the course of this year and how that, you have both your experience from Latvia and now your experience at NATO over the course of this crisis. And I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about how that environment has changed online in terms of information this year.
Thank you very much for your question. I think it was the COVID time was and still is a sort of crisis that really focuses everybody's capabilities, attention, and also shows the crisis that happen, whether that's in real life or information sphere or cyber and disinformation sphere. So for NATO, obviously, we are not the first responders of the health crisis. Those are national authorities. And just for the EU, also for NATO, the first few days and weeks were not necessarily the easiest because we are not the first responders. However, as soon as it became clear that allies were able to help other allies, as soon as it was clear that military was able to help civilians and medical personnel, and as soon as it was possible to identify and coordinate how that help should be provided, NATO acted. So up until now, we have flown more than 350 flights with hundreds of tons of equipment, military hospitals, various help in terms of equipment and medicine and whatever has been possible, advice, logistics, everything that allies and partners needed and that civilian sector needed. And meanwhile, of course, we also saw that there was a rising level of disinformation and misinformation very much spread through social media and online sites. And also that required rather immediate action. And it became clear that as far as NATO itself was concerned, we were in rather good shape. We had strong communications team, we had invested in digital, we had good channels, we had very proactive policies and communications, and we were able to tell the story what we were doing. So the proactive communications capability and substance on what to communicate became very important. But we also saw that it was a different situation in various allied countries. So, so the clear policies, reliance on experts, clear communications capability, and ability to respond to disinformation became very important also for each and every ally. So we exchanged information amongst the allies. We guided, we informed them when we saw what was appearing and that concerned them, and they informed us. So very important was also the local action. There were also several very active hostile information attacks, and I can tell you, for example, that in April, there was even a fake letter by the Secretary General that showed in one of the sort of fake sites informing that NATO will withdraw its troops from Lithuania. And that later on showed up in some of the social media, and there was a fake video. But very quickly, actually, it was Lithuania itself that debunked it. And we were able to spread that message very widely, and that attack never really took much space or didn't have much effect. But later on, similar attacks happened also on Latvia and Poland, so it was not just one-off. Overall, it was also quite clearly visible that not only Russia, but also Russian sources, but also China became much more active in its communications. and clearly targeting actually Chinese officials, clearly targeting in a number of cases the US and some other allies, but also sometimes there was joint messaging or similar messagings that came from both the Chinese and Russian sources. So again, from NATO side, as for our polling, we saw that we did audience research before, during, and after these type of attacks. We have seen that there is increased feeling of threat among the publics, but they also see that NATO and recognition of what NATO has done has increased. So there is a sort of, I think, a space for successful communications, very targeted communications. And there is certainly space for social media companies and tech platforms to be even more vigilant and very much act in a very preventive way to ensure that this health crisis does not become security crisis.
Yeah. Thank you. Director General, the European Commission has written in the past that these social media and the hybrid information warfare environment threatens the democratic political processes and values. And a 2018 poll that the Commission conducted found that 85% of Europeans thought that fake news was a specific problem in their country, and 83% thought that it had a negative impact on democracy more broadly. You mentioned a really fascinating question in your introductory remarks that I wanted to come back to. And you asked sort of what lies matter, that we need to be strategic, that we can't fight everything. And I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that question of when government looks at this huge information environment, when tech platforms look at this huge information environment, what should they be zeroing in on, and what lies actually do matter?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question, and thank you also for mentioning the very, very big concern that is out there in Europe, and I'm sure in the world as well, when it comes to disinformation and the worry about what it can do to our democracies and our democratic systems, and for people's information environment. To try to answer your question, because it's really not an easy one, I think we have to acknowledge that when we see this deliberate effort to disinform deployed by different actors, the goal of disinformation is not necessarily to get people to believe a lie. It's not as simple as that, and if it was, then, we would know it by now, and we could go after it, and we could only focus on content, as Dr. Bârgăoanu rightly focused on. It's not enough just to focus on content, even if it's definitely very important from my perspective, because information often is out there to create uncertainty, to destabilize, sometimes for political or for personal or for financial gain, sometimes to cause direct harm to people, to individuals, or even political entities. And the perpetrators of disinformation, of course, by the nature of the activity, often thrive very much in the shadows. So I would say our greatest weapon has to be transparency. It has to be the exact opposite in every way. By the way, also transparency about technology, relating to the intervention that we heard from Dr. Bârgăoanu. So we need to avoid, in all the different ways and with all the different tools that we've heard about. I mentioned some, the other speakers have mentioned others, and everyone is making a contribution, I think, to this, to them. And because research actually shows that if we just go for the lies and responding to the lies, we can actually end up doing the opposite of what we want. We can reinforce a lie instead of getting rid of it. So our approach in our communication department in 3 steps. Again, I'm simplifying for the sake of feasibility here in this panel, and report false narratives online when they really have and then always assess the potential impact before we actually do so, of course. And if it's deemed threatening, we definitely need to work out, as you will see some modest examples of, but they have the merit of existing on our coronavirus website, just to take that illustration, to create both positive, compelling, and evidence-based narratives to counter. That's what we can do on the substance side. I'm saying very much that it's not enough. All the other tools that we have been talking about here definitely need to be mobilized as well. But we can also indeed use the tools, of course, and the opportunities that our social media and the platforms. We've just heard examples of what is being done, or one example of what is being done. That certainly is also part of the answer. So and regulatory action certainly is also part of the answer, as we also heard mentioned. But coming back to the communication side, we definitely need to operate on all our communication channels, be it the social, but also the traditional media. We heard about fact-checking or talked about it. We have, for example, also a press room at our disposal, to address and bust some of the myths and the dis or misinformation that we see out there in the media. So this all fits in with a policy approach that pulls together stakeholders like researchers, educators, platforms, and more. And we have other means also at our disposal. We have a code of practice, I mentioned it, together with major platforms, the action plan, the Stratcom task force, and I think I referred to all of that already. But those are some of the means that we can use. Those are some of the means in the mix of something that definitely needs to be addressing both the legal side, the technological side, and the content side of the issue of disinformation.
Great. Thank you. Professor, I want to turn to you now to talk about we've sort of touched on this question of what more governments and tech platforms need to be doing cooperatively to push around this, which raises a lot of questions related to regulation as well. And you've written about this extensively. You sort of looked at 4 different approaches that Europe and governments could take to combating disinformation inside and outside the EU: self-regulation, co-regulation, direct regulation, and audience-centered solutions, like some of what Jacob was mentioning in terms of fact-checking and media literacy. I wonder if you could sort of talk about what you think Europe needs to be doing now regarding tech platforms that it is not doing.
Including drafting the code of practice to which the platforms adhered. And also I have told you that one of the spin-off of the high-level expert group on fake news and disinformation was the creation of the European Digital Media Observatory, which is based on the idea that we should create safe spaces at the national level where researchers and the regulators and people with a legitimate interest into this should have access to the data behind the technology. So that was a big discussion at the level of the high-level expert group that, for example, Facebook representative said, okay, we cannot give you access to our APIs because this is proprietary and this has commercial value, so you cannot look behind it. So I'm very glad that there was a spin-off of the discussion of the high-level expert group, and that Facebook, together with other actors, agreed to provide access, again, into some safe spaces in order, again, to have access to API, to big data, to how algorithms function. So I think that this is a huge step ahead, and I hope to see some very good results about these safe spaces in which, again, academia, civil society, and regulators could look deeply into how Facebook, for example, function. And I hope that the example that was set by Facebook should be carried on by Google, for example, and other digital platforms. What I could give you a very recent example about the fact that what we are doing is still not enough. And again, this is not criticism, but this is an input to the current debate, which is complex. Complexity is the feature of our time. You know, and I'm taking the perspective of Romania, which is a member of the European Union, which is a smaller country compared to Germany, for example, and it has to do some trade-offs when fighting disinformation in relation to the big platforms. You know that the QAnon conspiracy pages were banned by Facebook starting with October the 1st, right? I'm not sure about the date, but I think it was the beginning of October. In Romania, we reported the QAnon pages to Facebook several times. And there was no answer. There was no measure taken on banning this kind of pages from the Romanian Facebook, let's say. And they were finally banned beginning with the 1st of October. But on Sunday, I watched Facebook, and there are at least 10 QAnon pages in Romanian. And they are flourishing. They had about 100.5 interactions posting per day, which is huge. And as we speak, probably their audience is growing. And again, how can we deal with such a situation? They are spreading, of course, I think there is no need to argue that they are spreading very toxic messages, not to wear masks, not to do vaccines in general, not related to COVID, not to comply with what authorities say, and again, they are flourishing. As we speak, I think that their audience is growing. So again, I'm not bringing this example as any kind of criticism. I am a huge fan of Facebook. I post every day. It is a great tool for me as a person and as a public figure. But I think that at some point we are lagging behind. And especially during the COVID crisis, you could see that this kind of disinformation has immediate effects. This doesn't affect politics in general, it doesn't affect trust in general, but it has immediate results regarding people's lives. So again, there is an asymmetry of power between how fast these groups can find the platform where they can find themselves. And again, probably I have given a very extreme example about QAnon conspiracies, but there are less extreme examples that cannot be dictated by technology, by artificial intelligence, and they are completely without any kind of public oversight.
Jacob, there's obviously a lot that I could ask you just based on the last couple of speakers and their remarks. I wanted, though, we only actually have a few minutes left, and wanted to bring in some of the audience questions that we have been getting, and specifically put to you a question from Tyson Barker of the German Council for Foreign Relations, who asks about how Facebook is acting on and trying to police closed messaging systems and closed groups. This is something that we've seen an enormous problem with in countries like India in terms of WhatsApp. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how Facebook is addressing these vectors of disinformation and radicalization, trying to arrest the spread of COVID disinformation that are taking place in these closed environments on Facebook.
Right. So I think that there are two aspects here. The first one is WhatsApp, and second one are closed groups on Facebook. It's really two very different things. With regards to WhatsApp, I guess that one of the main things that we've done is that it is now not allowed to forward messages to more than 20 people, which kind of unscales the way people can indeed reach to a broader amount of folks. Now, with regards to the groups, well, to be very honest, it is some sort of a new area for us with regards to how content is regulated. But I wanted to make it very clear that all the community standards that apply on Facebook kind of newsfeed and stuff also apply in the groups. And so here there are also two kind of ways. The first one is if the content is reported, then it is analyzed by us. Now, it is fair to say that, you know, if you are in a closed group and everybody in the group think that the content is okay, whereas it's not okay, the chances that it will be reported are super lower. It is true. And this is why, apart from that, we also more and more proactively trying to find out content that is in breach of our community standards. For instance, now today, we are in a position to remove proactively, without it being reported, 99% of terrorist content that is posted on our platform. Are we like there on every single topic? Of course we're not. Is it a complicated race? Yes, it is a complicated race. But these, again, AI and machine learning tools are the best answer to go and see and check what's going on in the closed groups, because it is true, it is fair to say that there will be less reports being done in these groups.
Great, thank you, Tyson. I think we have probably time for one more quick question to the group, and I wanted to actually close out by asking our four European guests an American question, which is, and really we sort of only have a minute or so per speaker here left, but I'm curious, you know, from the U.S. perspective, what more would you like to see the U.S. government or tech platforms based here in the U.S., like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and so forth, what more do you need in terms of action or focus from the U.S. side of this to help what you see going on as the problems in Europe? Ambassador, we'll come to you first, and then Director General, and then the professor.
Well, NATO is a transatlantic alliance, so as much as American, Canadian as European. So I cannot speak on European behalf, but I'm sure my good friend Pia, with whom we have worked so closely during the COVID crisis, she will address that. What NATO would want from the tech platforms and private sector. We don't have a formulated policy as such, but very clearly, again, NATO is about protecting democracies, protecting our people, countries, and populations. So very clearly that tech and the private sector and the big companies are part of that equation. They are part of our societies. They have to take that responsibility, both investing in capabilities to protect smaller countries, smaller languages from disinformation. It's not only about English or German or big languages. It's about, you know, the variety of attacks that are there against all of our allies. It's about investing into creating the business models that is not necessarily based around the ads, based on controversy and attracting more clicks and more users and thus seeing those ads. It's about actually working with governments, working with parliaments, also as far as the regulation is concerned, as far as the smart regulation is concerned, so that it would be as targeted and as efficient as possible for long long-term security of our societies. It's also about thinking and discussing within the private sector how they can support quality media, how they can support independent investigative journalism, which plays such an important free and independent media in our democracies. So there's a lot to be done to protect democracy. It's a lot to be done to ensure security and defense of our countries and make sure that we are there as we have been in safety to build our businesses, profits and prosperity for our countries, not only what NATO has done for 70 years, but for the future to come.
Director General?
Thank you very much. I very strongly subscribe to what Ambassador Braže just said. I think indeed what we all can do from our different perspectives, be it as indeed institutions, NATO or political institutions, European institutions, national institutions and governments, of course, but also stakeholders and everyone who is working also in education and civil society. Indeed, this whole issue of democracy that you have raised in this important panel today is really essentially what it is about. So what we can do in terms of defending democracy against disinformation and actors perpetrating disinformation, I think is extremely important. And we are, by the way, also going to be coming forward later this year with a democracy action plan that our Vice President Jourova is working on at the moment with colleagues that has to do with electoral integrity, with media freedom, with media pluralism, and with the issue that we also discussed of disinformation. And to all of that, I think on both sides of the Atlantic, so to speak, the issue of trust is at the heart of it all. The issue of our citizens' trust in our democracies, and for example, in the way that we deal responsibly with their data. That their data is safe and there's no abuse. We have, as I'm sure you know, in the European Union for some years been implementing a very ambitious regulation on data protection, which I think is a good example of where we want to be when it comes to deserving the trust of our citizens. Indeed, that we can handle and protect their data. And I think that that's something that we all need to work together to achieve. And it's part of this landscape. It's part of making it difficult for perpetrators of disinformation to win the battle, so to speak, alongside the other let's say, tools and arms that we have been discussing to embrace uncharacteristically for the Commission a military language. But I think it's about democracy, it's about trust, and we all have a role to play in defending it, and indeed in equipping also our citizens to see through the disinformation and learning how to indeed have their own say in this more complex social media landscape that is the media landscape of today.
Great. And Professor, your thoughts on sort of what you would like to see action-wise from the United States or the tech platforms based here?
For the big platforms. Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. I would expect more transparency and access to data in order to expose together the phenomenon, especially as far as the technological factors are involved. I mean, I would expect more cooperation in working together in order to expose fake accounts, network of bots, inauthentic behavior on platforms. So this will be the first expectation. And the second expectation is to have more investments in digital literacy, in technology literacy, in data literacy, and not only for individual citizens, for young generation, for people in schools, but for leaders, for decision makers, including political decision makers and regulators.
Thank you very much. And Jacob, just I'll ask you sort of real quickly a version of this question. Your 1 minute answer to what action you think the government should be taking, but that they are not in this space.
1 minute will be tough. But broadly speaking, it is indeed about a better and deeper cooperation between NGOs, public administration, academics, and big companies like us to reach out a point where we will be in the best position to protect democracies. And on this, I really do insist on some aspect, regulation aspect, that needs to be kind of more discussed and advanced. And I guess it is a long journey, and we are on it. We know it, but it does take some time. Now, to very quickly answer to some points about the kind of fighting with misinformation, also in smaller countries. I need to make it very clear that we have fact checkers in almost, I think there's 1 or 2 countries missing in the European Union, but we do have fact checkers and many fact checkers, for instance, in the Baltic countries. With regards to the remark about the ads, well, the point of our ads transparency tools, which, by the way, include an access to our information for academics, APIs for academics with regards to political ads, for them to be able to further analyze more in details what is going on with the political ads. This is really a strong answer for the ads, at least to be clearly, transparent in this political process. And again, transparency is a journey, and I fully acknowledge that. And I don't think we're there. I think we are in a much better position than a few years ago. With regards to the cooperation with governments, again, I mean, it's been, I think, almost 2 years that Mark Zuckerberg, for the first time, said officially that there is a need of some decision to be taken, not by the platforms, but by democratically elected institutions. So, I mean, we fully agree on this one. And the last comment is indeed with regards to the independent media, which we also strongly support. And we really fully acknowledge the fact that it is one of the many kind of pieces of the very complex puzzle we are working on to ensure good information and therefore trustful democracy.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob, Ambassador, Director General, Professor. Great conversation. Obviously, we could talk about this for the rest of the day and probably the rest of the week, but I think we've run out of time now. So my thanks to the 4 of you for sharing your views and your perspectives on this incredibly important and complex challenge, and my thanks to the Bucharest Forum for hosting this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Bye. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.